Will the worst war in Europe since World War II end in 2025? Russian President Vladimir Putin says he's ready to speak with US President-elect Donald Trump, who has made a swift end to the conflict one of his priorities.
А мы всегда говорили, что мы готовы и к переговорам, и к компромиссам. Просто противная сторона в прямом и переносном смысле этого слова, противная сторона отказалась от переговоров. А мы-то всегда к этому готовы. А результатом компромиссов, этих переговоров всегда является компромисс.
Yet his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has insisted Ukraine relinquish sovereignty over Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea as a precondition for talks. Is negotiation achievable? And what, if any, are the implications for Taiwan? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ming. Joining us today are Christine Zhang, Ming, Chuan University Department of International Affairs and Diplomacy Assistant Professor, and Wen-Ti Sung, Atlantic Council Global China Hub Non-Resident Fellow. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today.
Thank you.
The Russian-Ukraine war has been ongoing for nearly 3 years without a ceasefire. An estimated 700,000 Russians and up to 100,000 Ukrainians have lost their lives. Russia controlled about 18% of Ukrainian territory at the end of November, according to Reuters. More than $170 billion has been spent by the US and NATO in Ukraine. And over the past year, Kyiv has lost key military strongholds in Ukraine like Avdiivka and Vuhledar. Kyiv Independent reports that Kyiv is ending the year outgunned and outmanned. Historically, wars end with either a complete military victory, an armistice, or a negotiated peace treaty. Wen-Ti, let me come to you first. So let's deal with the first way that a war can end, a complete military victory. Russia has the upper hand, so why not push for that military victory rather than negotiations?
I think Putin is not pushing for complete military conquest because it is hard, to put it simply. I think the war has been going on for almost 3 years by this point. The war is hard to win completely for Russia because of Western aid that's continuing to flow into Ukraine, for once. I know the number is somewhere in the tune of $170 billion internal Western, including NATO aid to Ukraine in recent months and years. And military aid, we're seeing this country playing what Franklin Roosevelt used to call arsenal of democracy for Ukraine. We're seeing Poland and other European countries stepping up to accept refugees from Ukraine so that those who are fighting on the front line feel the comfort, continue to fight, knowing that the family will be okay. And all these other additional factors, logistical lifelines, these other countries provide to Ukraine are all going a long way toward making sure that Ukraine is able to fight from a position of security, psychologically and physically, and that's making it harder for Russia, for sure.
Professor Zhang, so the West, NATO has denied, according to Wen-Ti, Russian victory, but has it in effect also denied a victory to Ukraine? So critics say that Biden did actually have a choice, either provide weapons, enough weapons to give Ukraine a victory, or to bring about negotiations, forced negotiations, and they say that he failed to take or make that choice. What's your assessment of that?
I think regarding the military weapons, especially for victory, it's actually a difficult question because what types of weapons that is really meant to be victory, and also it is very difficult for the US and also NATO or the EU because the risk of nuclear escalations. And under these circumstances, the West need to be very cautious, especially on attacking Russia mainland.
I mean, these critics have addressed the fears of nuclear escalation.
Yes.
They have said that, for instance, in the UK, it's understood that they think that those concerns were overstated because, in fact, at every stage, despite the threats, you know, they proved to be illusory. What do you say to that?
Well, I think probably for the UK now, it's illusory, but this is what's happening. Invasion is what's happening in Ukraine so far. So I wouldn't say that it's going to be an illusion of Russian military weapons because Russia has the nuclear weapons indeed. So I think it should be very careful, especially in terms of the use of weapons.
Wen-Ti, what do you think about that? I mean, the critics of Biden and also those Western governments is that the fear of escalation overtook them laying out a path to victory and towards the end of the war for Ukraine?
I mean, there's a few ways to look at this, of course. One way to think about it is that, yes, Russia does have nuclear weapons and Ukraine currently does not. However, dogs that bark may not bite or may not bite nearly as hard as they threaten to. So that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that I think it's extremely rare ever since the end of World War II that we see any nuclear armed state using nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear armed country. Indeed, we've not seen a case over the last almost 80 years. So it's in this sense that, yes, Russian nuclear superiority is a concern here in the equation, but in terms of conventional warfare that's happening on the battlefield, that's not quite a major consideration. I think a bigger issue is that even if somehow Western countries double down in their support for Ukraine, Ukraine is able to make a bigger inroad into Russia itself, what's going to be the international law legitimacy of it? How is Ukraine going to be in a position to digest, swallow, and make use of Russian territory? Does it have the right mandate to do so? And what's going to happen? I think that kind of chaos and uncertainty is what keeps the international community still hoping for a more negotiated settlement more than something that's going to be even more serious military escalation-wise.
And Professor Chang, let's go back to what we said at the beginning of the show. So on December 30th, Sergei Lavrov basically said that as a precondition for talks, Ukraine must give up sovereignty over those eastern provinces in Donbass plus Crimea. Does this indicate to you that Russia isn't serious about negotiating?
I think Russia is serious about negotiations because they've already occupied the 4 territories, Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and also Zaporizhia. So this is the fact. So what they are trying to do is to push the West to recognize the fact. So I think they are serious about the negotiation, but what they don't want is a ceasefire, but they are looking for a peace settlement rather than just a ceasefire.
Oh, okay. And so it's not necessarily the process that that there would be a ceasefire first, leading to a peace settlement. What they're saying is we must go direct to the peace agreement.
Yes, I think because for Ukraine it's still uncertain, they couldn't really reverse the situation in the battlefield. And also their NATO membership is still pending, so everything uncertain. So definitely they want to go for a ceasefire. But for Russia, they've already occupied the territories, so they don't want any uncertainty. They want to pin down the fact that they already occupy the territories.
Okay, good point. Wen-Ti, in that clip that we saw at the start of the show, Putin talks about compromise. What do you think this means for him?
Compromise, I think, for Putin is a word that's not too different in meaning from capitulation. I think Putin likely wants to hold on to the Ukrainian territory that he already has conquered, find a way to gradually move under, if not Russian sovereignty, then Russian suzerainty or some other designation like international free zone or a military free zone with some kind of Russian veto power over it.
So when he talks about compromise, he's talking about the Ukrainians compromising.
Indeed, by compromising, it's more like saying Ukraine should make concessions. I think that's what he's thinking about at this juncture.
Okay, and Professor Zhang, do you think Putin, what kind of compromise is he willing to offer?
What kind of compromise? I think he's willing to maybe ceasefire and settle down a peaceful negotiation and just occupy the 4 territories, but not go further other territories of Ukraine. I think that is one of his compromises because, well, in my view, I think compromise from Putin should be Ukraine now. It's on the side of the West. It's on the side of the EU. It's not really what it used to be a brother of Russia. So it's kind of like saying goodbye to their brotherhood. So I think this is sort of the compromise that Putin should make because it is impossible for Russia to take over the whole Ukraine or to take over Kiev. But Putin also concerns the NATO enlargement to the east. So this is actually the Russian main concerns.
Vladimir Zelensky has made it clear that he wants, Ukraine or the Ukrainian territory that they hold. He recently told Sky News that he'd like to put them under the umbrella of of NATO, because this would then help to protect against any other attack from Russia in the future. And Russia, of course, will not accept Ukraine joining NATO. So in your view, is there any way past this?
I think it's going to be very difficult because this is the main dispute between both sides now. And also, I think the attitude of the US and also for NATO and the EU, they are trying just to leave it hanging in the air. And they have an open discussion about whether if they are going to invite Ukraine to NATO, but they are not going to decide.
What do you think the arguments are? I mean, because NATO previously said that it would, at the last NATO summit, it has said that it would work towards Ukraine's, like the pathway to Ukraine's membership. Do you get any sense that that position is changing?
No, I think the position is not changed. As what I just mentioned, because their attitude is that we are open to the discussion, but we are not going to decide when we are going to invite Ukraine to NATO membership. As the new president of the NATO Parliament Assembly just said that it's realistic that we are going to include Ukraine in NATO, but we don't know when. So I think they are trying to suspend the most important issue in the war.
And do you think that, I mean, for Ukraine, they see it quite black and white. If they're part of NATO, then Russia would not attack them because of the fear of, you know, inciting Article 5. So is there an argument that Ukraine should be part of NATO?
I think it's actually quite difficult because if Ukraine is under the umbrella of NATO, probably Russia would find a different strategy to do different things to attack Ukraine, because like this time, in Putin's own words, this is not a war, it's a special military operation. And what he says is that he's trying to protect the Russian speakers in Donbas region. So he's doing something for justice. So, you know, even though under the umbrella of NATO, you would never know what would happen in the future. He could use different strategies.
Wen-Ti, let's go to a recent poll that was carried out by Kiev's Social Monitoring Center. 16% of people support Zelensky's re-election when it comes to the time that the country can actually hold an election. But 60% of people oppose his participation. So only 16% support, and then 60% oppose even his participation. Why do you think this is the case, and how have things changed for Zelensky?
Yeah, I think I'll first echo Professor Chang here in terms of the argument about NATO membership for Ukraine here. I think in theory, of course, as a multilateral security organization, you want to make sure that people feel like, in theory, they're open to new members joining, and that Ukraine is a potential such member. But to translate that theoretical offer into a concrete policy level, practical offer is going to be dependent on a number of things happening, and one of which presumably will be the meaningful, sustainable cessation of war fighting on the Ukrainian theater. Otherwise, in the second that Ukraine joins NATO, if the war is still going on, that's going to mean that other NATO members will be entering into a war with Russia as well. So that's the kind of situation where it's hard to get to, which also in a sense means that really whether Russia has, whether Ukraine ever joins NATO or not, Russia really has a big role to play here. But yes, to get back to your question earlier about seemingly there's only 16%, a significant minority of Ukrainians who are actively supporting President Zelensky of Ukraine at the moment. I think that's almost understandable in a way, because oftentimes what you see at the beginning of war is that initially you see rallying around the flag effect. People try to rally around the commander-in-chief who's there to provide security and protection for a whole nation. As the war drags on into nearly 3-year mark, really, at this point, there will be a level of war weariness. There will be maybe idea that perhaps a different horse might lead to different results. I think that's understandable, but of course, we are nowhere near presidential election time in Ukraine just yet. As we get closer, as the campaign gets heated, I think we're going to see Zelensky becoming a more viable, more stronger candidate again, should he try to run for re-election.
Okay, now Trump's Ukrainian peace envoy, retired Army Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, is currently on a visit to Kyiv and several other European countries, but has no plans to visit Moscow. He says his objective is fact-finding rather than leading negotiations. Kellogg himself sent a proposal, the Kellogg Plan, to Trump this year that would see battle lines frozen and NATO membership taken off the table in the near term for Ukraine. However, critics argue it heavily favors Russia. Trump has made it no secret that ending the war swiftly is a priority for his term. Prior to the US election, he said he could end the war in 24 hours. Professor Zhang, let me come to you. So Trump has said that, you know, in his harshest sort of bargaining terms, that he will force Zelensky to the table to negotiate, or he can, by cutting military aid, and force Putin by increasing the aid to Ukraine. What's your assessment of, you know, how successful Trump and Kellogg could be to negotiate an end to the war?
I think Donald Trump is very determined. I think the U.S. is quite determined on the issue that both sides need to negotiate or sit on the negotiation table to reach something. So, and also according to Kellogg's plan, well, the U.S. also offer different incentives for Russia, and they also offer different incentives for Ukraine as well. But whether if it's really going to be successful, I think that should go back to the disputes and also the compromises and also concessions both sides are willing to make.
Well, Wen-Ti, what do you think Kellogg will be doing, the aim of his meetings with Kyiv and also with Ukraine's EU allies on this trip?
I mean, first of all, I think it's going to be straightforward fact-finding, meet and greet to make sure that he establishes familiarity and channels of communication with leadership on both sides so that they can have ongoing working level communication happening between all sides as a way to build the infrastructure for diplomacy, if you will. Moreover, of course, he's there to conduct back-channel diplomacy to find out what's the bottom line and the red line as well for both sides to see whether there is room for a certain intersection such that a meaningful cessation could happen, a cessation of hostility, I mean. Because if President Trump were able to reach a Ukraine-Russia war ending deal, or war pausing deal at least, early on in his tenure as president, then likely that's going to be a major boost to him domestic politically.
Right, and do you think, Professor Zhang, that you know, a lot of is riding on this, on his success, and he probably understands that. Does that make him more desperate to strike a deal?
Yes, I think so. He usually mentioned that this is the failure of Joe Biden. This is not really his fault. So he's the savior. He's going to change the situation and make ceasefire and also a peace settlement between both sides.
Yeah, and yet both Putin and Lavrov have rejected the initial suggestions by Trump's team for a 20-year delay to Ukraine's NATO membership and also to have a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, not NATO, but European. The heart of my question, is he going to be more desperate, is do you think that we will be more susceptible to a bad deal being forced through?
I think according to Kellogg's plan, even though the NATO membership is going to be suspending, but U.S. promised to provide more military support as well and also economic benefits. So this might be the compromises that Ukraine or Zelensky could make without umbrella under NATO. So I think this is one of the reasons that the U.S. is determined to put the both sides on the negotiation table.
Okay, Wen-Ti, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, I think obviously Zelensky doesn't want to be seen as desperate because the second you're seen as desperate is the second you lose bargaining leverage vis-a-vis Putin for sure. So I think that's also why you see U.S. President Biden, as one of his last acts as president, issue another new major round of assistance to Ukraine as well, just to make sure that even At least for the first 3 to 6 months or so after Biden steps down, Zelensky still has enough legacy aid from the U.S. to go on so that he won't seem as desperate. Hopefully that means that Zelensky will be able to survive initially for the first few months. After that period, the calculus changes for Trump, because Trump, if he swoop in and then somehow strike a deal nice and fast, he'll be seen as him swooping in to clean out the mess, so-called mess, quote unquote, that Biden left. But however, if Trump 6 months in, Ukraine war is still going on, then that becomes Trump's problem, and Trump will have less incentives than before in terms of forcing Zelensky to strike a deal that's not favorable to Ukraine.
Okay, now Joe Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky have framed this war as a fight between democracy and autocracy, and warned that if Putin wins, every dictator will believe he can use force to change international borders. European countries like Poland and the Baltic states are concerned that they could be the next victims of what they call Putin's imperialistic ambitions. Professor Zhang, so therefore, can we say that how this war ends and any peace agreement, that it will impact the international order?
Yes, I think it definitely will impact the international order, especially for Europe, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union and also because of the 1990s economic crisis, Russia was a declining superpower. So the European Unions, they were quite relaxed. But after this war, that means Russia is back. So many European countries, like for example, Poland, Czech Republic, they're actually going back to review their military spending and also their defense, weaponaries, all these things. So it would definitely influence the international order because Russia is back. And well, it could start a war or start an invasion to other countries.
Right. And Wen-Ti, so what would that mean for, if we're looking at the US itself, you know, if it was a bad deal, what would this mean for US leadership in the world?
It's not going to be a good thing for U.S. leadership around the world for sure if a bad deal emerges at the end. What we're looking at here is that if Ukraine was allowed to fall or to otherwise compromise or capitulate on very unfavorable, morally problematic terms, that's going to lead to a certain domino effect. That's going to create a dent, a decrease in the credibility of U.S.-led NATO and other Western like-minded countries' coalition.
So how would we define, you know, a bad deal? Would it be giving up the four territories? Mm-hmm. Would it be no NATO membership? How do we define what this is? That is a failure for Ukraine and a loss for the US and the West?
My opinion is that it's already the loss for Ukraine because they couldn't reconquer the occupied territories, and the NATO membership is not really on their hands. They don't actually have any bargaining power. So I think it's already a bad deal for Ukraine. The only thing they can get is a ceasefire and well, maybe a peace settlement from Russia, and that's it. So I think so far it's a bad deal.
Right.
Already.
I think let's go through the checklist. The good deal will be a peace settlement that has staying power with Ukraine recovering the lost territory. That will be a good deal. I think we are relatively far from it.
The most hopeful.
Yes,
right.
And therefore maybe a medium deal will be Ukraine not able to directly get back the lost territory, but the lost territory get declared under some kind of, not quite a United Nations mandate, but something to that effect that has international jurisdiction and that keeps Russians out. A bad deal will be Russian get to claim some kind of de facto suzerainty over those lost Ukrainian territory and then find a way over time to swallow those into Russia itself. That would be a bad deal.
And let me ask you directly then, so if we were looking at a bad deal, what message does that send to Xi Jinping?
That might is right, that there are limits to Western cohesion and to how much the West, including especially U.S. under Trumpian administration, how much they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. So I think for Xi, that a bad deal for Ukraine will mean a more emboldened Xi towards Taiwan, towards other parts of Indo-Pacific as well. So that's, in that sense, Ukraine-Russia war is about a lot more than Ukraine-Russia itself, for sure.
Okay, and so Professor Zhang, how do you think that we could see China's behavior changing if such a scenario took place? its partner Russia achieving its goals in Ukraine?
Okay, in my opinion, I think China probably won't change their behavior because they've already been very aggressive to Taiwan, and
But they've kept it below the level of war.
yeah, below.
So would there be any shift to that?
I think it's not very possible because Russia and China, they're very different countries. The political power structures are very different. The political system, also economic structures are very different. So, and also Taiwan and Ukraine are two different countries as well. So under so many uncertainties and also differences, in my opinion, I don't really think China would change their attitudes towards Taiwan just because Putin gets what he wants.
Okay, interesting. And Wen-Ti, would you agree with that assessment?
Yes and no. I think obviously China has its own longer-term strategic calculus for sure, but then I think military is only one potential dimension of policy China could be pursuing. I think when she looks at a potential bad deal for Ukraine, for example, what message I send is that what may seem like a very centripetal West is actually a little more centrifugal for sure. So I mean, in terms of diplomatic outreaches, finding a way to opportunistic pick up some Western countries out of the US-led camp, I think those maneuvers are in the offing for sure for China. That may also mean potentially a return of a more tough guy wolf warrior diplomacy type of posture that we have not seen from China for, well, we can't say we have not seen, but we've seen a bit less in recent months.
So you also don't think that it would then, essentially give the green light to conflict? Because what we've been talking about is that it translates to the fact that might means right.
For sure, yes, of course. I mean, what I think we're trying to say here is that as as a boring egghead social scientist, what we're trying to say is that a bad deal for Ukraine would be a conducive but not sufficient condition in terms of triggering immediate Chinese military action.
Thank you so much, Professor Chang and Wen-Ti, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.